Right, welcome to this biology lesson, where we are looking at cell organization. Cell organization. A group of tissues, we said they form an organ. A group of organs, they form a system. Systems together, they make up now an organism. That is how an organism is formed. This is just a summary of what I was explaining. So a group of cells, in fact, we're supposed to have organelles. A group of organelles, they form a cell. A group of cells, they form tissues. Tissues, when you combine them, they form organs. When you combine organs, you are forming a system. Combining systems, you are forming an organism. So you need to understand the basic of life. This is the basic of life that we need to understand. All right, we are going to look at transport across the cell membrane. Basically, we are going to look at diffusion, osmosis, as well as active transport. What is diffusion? Diffusion is just the movement of particles from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration down the concentration gradient. Let us look at these factors now so that we can understand them better. We will start with concentration. So this refers to the difference in concentration of particles between two regions. So the higher the concentration gradient, the faster the rate is going to be. What of the surface area? The larger the surface area of the diffusion, the faster the rate of diffusion. Thickness of diffusion surface. So the thinner the diffusion surface, the faster the diffusion rate is going to be. That's why when we look at excretion, we look at the kidney. The kidney has got a part called a nephron. The nephron has a structure called the loop of Henle. That is where diffusion takes place during selective reabsorption. So those they have thinner walls. Those thinner holes, they are there to make diffusion to happen fast. How does temperature affect diffusion? Remember, temperature is just a degree of hotness or coldness of a region. So now, increasing in temperature increases the kinetic energy of particles, causing them to diffuse at a faster rate. Okay, so let us also look at this one, the particle size. So the bigger the particle size, the slower the diffusion is going to be. The smaller the particle size, the faster the diffusion is going to be. Look at this example. That's why even when we are eating, for easier digestion, you need to crush the food into smaller pieces. Why we do that? So that diffusion, or rather digestion, can happen fast. So that symbolizes to say the smaller particles will make diffusion to be fast, while the larger particles will make diffusions to be slow. Importance of diffusion. So diffusion is important in living organisms in the following ways. 1. Oxygen moves from the lungs to the blood, and from the blood to the tissue cells by diffusion. That is very true. Also, carbon dioxide moves from the tissue cells to the blood, and from the blood to the lungs by diffusion. So these are some of the importances of diffusion. Dissolved food moves from the blood into the tissue by diffusion. Yes, during digestion. Also, metabolic waste such as urea move from the tissue cells into the blood by diffusion. Then we have carbon dioxide is of course needed for photosynthesis by plants. Oxygen produced during photosynthesis moves out of the leaves to the atmosphere by diffusion. Water vapor moves out of the air spaces of the leaves to the atmosphere during transpiration, and that is correct. Let us look at osmosis. What is this osmosis? It's just the movement of water molecules from a region of high concentration or high water potential to a region of low water potential through a selectively permeable membrane. So what is this selectively permeable membrane? So this is the membrane that can allow water molecules to pass through because of their small size, but cannot allow solutes because these are bigger particles. So as we can see here, there is an illustration of osmosis. Here we have high concentration, the other one we have less concentration. And here we have the selectively permeable membrane. So that is just an illustration on osmosis, of course. The effects of osmosis in living organisms. All right, so here basically you need to understand that there are three types of solution. There is what we call as hypotonic solution. There is also what we call as isotonic solution, and there is what we call as hypertonic solution. So these are the three types of solutions that we are going to look at as we refer the effects of osmosis using these three types of solutions. What is hypotonic solution? Okay, so now hypotonic solution, this is just a solution whose concentration is lower than the concentration inside a living cell. I'll give you an example here, an illustration. Isotonic solution is the one whose concentration is equal. So this one is equal. Iso means equal. Hypo means lower concentrated than the cell. Hyper. Hyper, a solution whose concentration is higher. That is hyper. Okay, so let us look at a diagrammatic form of these three types of solutions. Okay, so now you need to understand that due to the absence of the cell wall, animal cells, they do not have a cell wall. So if you place a red blood cell in an hypotonic solution, it will gain water by osmosis. As a result, it will swell, which will lead to burst. And the bursting of the animal cell is called the cell lysis. So this is the cell lysis. So when an animal cell is placed in an hypertonic solution, it starts to lose water by osmosis. As a result, it will reduce in size, which will lead to a process called crenation. The cell becomes crenated, it becomes dehydrated, meaning the cell has lost so much water. So this is basically that is happening. We have the red blood cell placed in these different solutions. So hyper, it bursts. The first one, this is hyper, it will burst because the animal cell has no cell wall, so it's going to burst. so it will change in size and shape. Then if it is hyper, it becomes crinated, where it will reduce in size. That is an illustration there on the three types of solution: hypertonic solution, isotonic solution, as well as hypotonic solution. What of now in plants? Since those that we're looking at, it was animals. What of plants? Remember, plant cells, they have a cell wall. Animal cells, they do not have a cell wall. Of course, because of the cell wall, when a plant cell is placed in an hypotonic solution, it will start to gain water. As a result, it will change the size, which will lead to a process called turgid. It becomes turgid. A plant cell will not burst because it has a cell wall. It will only become turgid. When you place the plant cell in an hypertonic, it will plasmolized. Of course, it will lose the water by osmosis. As a result, it will shrink. That is called the plasmolysis. This is an illustration to show the same happening.